Hello everyone, welcome back to the KMTRADERS channel. So this is the full market analysis in volume 94. So basically we're just going to give you an insight on this week and also compare our analysis from last week as well. So without further ado, we're going to start off with gold. So what our analysis from last week was, we were expecting a possibility of price pushing into the high and then having a sell-off into the downside, probably aiming for around 1720. So looking at this basis right now, I think that there is a possibility that this was the actual turning point in the market and price is probably shifting over to the downside. So I am going to consider this as our first scenario, which is over here, and then I'm going to shift the idea that price has a possibility of pushing up higher still. That's if it wants to, and if that happens, we could expect price to push around into the 1820. So basically this high and then roll over to the downside. But the fundamental bias here is that we're expecting a drop off soon. So you don't really have to be involved early. You can just wait for the second retest. Again, this is just a safer way of doing it, waiting for the retest and then continuating down. But again, if you want to catch the top of this move, again, we're just waiting for price to show us more signs and evidence that price is dropping lower. So to be honest, this kind of looks like it's dropping off, but just to be sure, I'm just going to watch out for this downtrend line here. So if we break this and push higher, there's going to be like alarm bells that's going to be ringing that potentially we could see a break higher and then possibly one move lower. So once we expect this move lower, where are we expecting price to go? Is roughly around the 1720 and within 1680 range. So within this area we can then discuss what's going to happen next, but this is the next step that we're going to need to assess. So what's going to happen here, and at this point we just need to judge price action. So the third thing that we need to just discuss is if price breaks the downtrend, which is here, and price continues to push higher. So if we do, and we get a break of this grey zone, which is around 1840, I would be potentially looking in for more continuation moves higher. So that is pretty much the main kind of direction that we will be thinking for. So we'll be looking for some bullish setups. So let's take a look now into EURUSD. So EURUSD was quite of an eventful week. It had we had a push up, which we kind of expected, but we were expecting price to make much more of a stronger continuation higher and not have this sell-off. So we didn't expect this too much, but for now what we're looking at is there is a possibility that price could reverse up still. Even though that this does look like it's crashing lower, there is a slight possibility that price could push higher. But again, I'm not trying to be I'm not trying to be so straightforward on this bullish idea. I'm trying to review price action as much as I can. So that is what I'm looking at first. But if we start to see price completely break through to this downside barrier, then I'll be looking and waiting for a retest, and that's where I'll probably be thinking, most likely. So I'm just going to keep the first scenario as just a possible option. In terms of percentage of what I think is going to happen, I couldn't really tell you. I'm just going off this from the basis of what price action is right now. So we can see price is kind of rejected already. Maybe this is the start of the reversal. That is a possible idea. That's what I'm thinking. But again, if price breaks this zone here and pushes lower, then I'll be convinced to be looking out for some sell-off opportunities. Okay, so that is just waiting for a retest. So let's take a look at NZDJPY. So for this pair, we can see there's a double top approaching here. There is a possibility of price pushing lower. We were expecting price to push lower, so there could be an opportunity for price to drop off, and maybe this could give us a way to buy eventually into the market. and then we could expect price to rocket off. So that's kind of where I'm looking at right now. We're just pretty much in this ranging motion right now. So I think it's probably based on the fact that we've had this huge push from the 12th of October all the way to the 20th, so a good few days there of growth. I think price is now stalling here, so we could expect a short downfall move in which we can take part in, and possibly we could then eventually look in for buys for when it wants to carry on and pushing higher. So that's just an option that I'm keeping an eye out for. AUDUSD, I was expecting price to drop off, but eventually it started to push through. So essentially what we're just waiting for is to see if we can get price to continue to push higher if it wants to. But if we start to see price break lower, I wouldn't be surprised if that does happen soon, but it could look something like this. And then in this case we will be then looking for the opportunity to buy, once we find that perfect dip. So I think ultimately we are still pushing higher. We just need to wait for price to make this low before then we can create the new higher high. That's essentially what I'm thinking. So around the 76.5 is where we're targeting. So we just need to wait for this to possibly happen. Price could easily just drop off straight away, and then we could look for the buy, and we can also be a part of the counter trend. So whether it's at the top here, or if price just drops off low, we can look at continuing those moves lower. So that's pretty much what I'm looking at for AUD. So nothing really too different really there. So take a look at USDJPY. So what I'm interested in seeing here is to see if we can continue pushing lower, but what I'm also keeping in mind is that we're wanting price to push up higher, which is the second circle here where we want to see price go up. So I think that we could say that there is a shift and change, there's a price action change right there where there's bullish pressure kicking in. We could wait for price action to make a retest and continue higher. So that's one possible bias that we could look into. The second scenario is that if it fails to push higher, it probably could make one more low and then continue higher. So they're the two things that I'll be watching out for into the market, and that can give us two scenarios of two trading opportunities. So that's if we start to see failure, we'll look for a sell. If we then start to see price reversing up, we'll start to look for that buy. But ultimately I'm quite bullish on this, so we'll see where we can head over in the next week or so. CADJPY, again, I'm very curious to see if we can continue pushing higher from this 1 4-hour candle. Let me just get rid of this, but essentially we were looking for more price moves lower. So an equal valid trade setup you could look at is to see if price is going to continue to push higher. So let me do that again, sorry. So possibly we could see price make a retest and then continue higher. But what I'm also keeping in mind here also is price to maybe push up higher and then drop lower for then get that continuation higher. So I wouldn't be surprised if that happened, but likewise for now, as price action stands, I am looking for some buys for then to see if we could find some sort of rejection and whatnot. So definitely keeping in mind an outlook and keeping a lookout for that. EJ, we can see price, well, what we looked at was price possibly making one push up and then one price push lower. Ultimately we were looking for a buy, so let's just move this across. We can see there's like a triple bottom being formed right here, so I'm very curious to see if that will hold. There is a possibility of price pushing up higher, but this could be one scenario where this happens, where price pushes up and then drops off again before making one more low and then continuing higher. The second scenario is that price just continues to rocket higher. And the third scenario is we'll get a breakthrough and then a drop and then the push higher. So that is equally valid in my opinion. Again, again, this is where we're possibly looking in for price action. So let's just see what we'll see here and go from there. So moving on to NZDJPY, pretty much we're looking at price moves possibly pushing high, but I think this one could drop off and then we could end up looking at price moves pushing higher. So wouldn't be so surprised if that happens. So let's take a look at this. Sorry. So price pushing up and then possibly dropping lower, and then price continuing to sell off. So that's something that we could look for. I'm not really focusing on this one too much. I'm not really seeing anything too much. But another thing is that price could just continue to push higher, and we'll get that break up. AUDJPY, there is a possibility on this one. I'm curious to see if this will hold, but essentially I'm looking for a downside move, in which then we could possibly look for the next move towards the upside. So I think this week we'll be looking for price to push lower, and then I'm going to see if we're going to push up. So we're effectively waiting for price to, you know, either break towards the upside or if we can drop off to the downside. Sorry about that, let me get back to the charts. So finally, the last two pairs, USDCHF. So this one has been quite interesting. We were expecting price to make a new push lower. Essentially we can see that price was has now pushed lower, so we're now into this zone here at 0.91. So if we can hold off from this zone, my thoughts on this again still remain valid, that if we stay above this this 0.91 level, we found a nice reaction, but essentially if we can get price to continue to push higher and higher, we could expect price to break above 0.935, which is this zone, and then we can start to possibly see, you know, that there could be a turnover, or we will get price to continue to push higher. The other thing is, if we get a break lower from this zone this week, we could be looking at more continuations lower, and that's equally possible scenario that we could take to just be again mindful of. So just be curious and just be careful of that 0.91 level, and this is a strong candle up, so it'll take some time for price to come back down again, but I'm curious to see if we can continue to push higher, because then we can start looking at some good buying moves from here. So yeah, I'm looking for some buying moves along the way. So if price starts to rally up higher, again, we're just going to be looking at those continuation moves. That's all we're going to be doing. And then finally, USDCAD. So for this pair, I was actually looking for more bullish pressure into the market. We can see we've had that huge sell-off here, so there is a possibility of price dropping lower from next week, possibly break these lows and then push higher. So we could look at something like this. But the other scenario that we could be looking at is price comes back down and then pushes up higher. So essentially looking at price to, you know, revert lower, staying above this 1.23 zone, and then rebounding from this level onwards. So let me just move this, well, I can move this sideways actually, pop that here. But we can see here we're just focusing on this this level up here, so between 1.245 and 1.23. If we break this low, we'll end up being pushing lower, and then we can still look for sells along the way. But if this 1.23 level holds, we could be looking at price moves to push higher. So ultimately that's the general bias of this pair. But yeah, there's not really been that much bias changes this week from my analysis. There has been a lot of moves though through last week, so hopefully you did catch some trades there. If you made it all the way to this end of this video though, I do appreciate your time for listening. If you got any value from it, make sure to drop a like and obviously comment if you have any questions, and that'll be all guys. So thank you very much for listening all, and we'll see you all in our next week's video.